I'm just going to take these books and read portions of them, and if anyone later after I finish, you're welcome to come up and go through the books. I ask that you not go through them earlier because I didn't want to lose my marks that I had in them and so forth. But I welcome you. I want you to come and look at them later. And if you have any question about anything that I read, if you feel that in any way it's been taken out of context, I want you to please ask me about that particular portion. We'll go back. You can look at the book. You can decide for yourself. But these books, I have made the statement that they're anti-God, or they're anti-Christian, they're anti-religion. That gets it in a very broad scope. And I'm going to begin with a poem that's in this book, which is one of the Man series. There's about 30 of these books from the Man series. These books, I understood at first, were ungraded. I understand now that they are 10th through 12th grade. So we'll accept them as 10th through 12th grade books. This begins, "It must be lonely to be God. Nobody loves a master. No, despite the bright hosannas, bright dear lords, bright determined reverence of Sunday eyes, picture Jehovah striding through the hall of his importance, creatures running out from servant corners to acclaim, to shout appreciation of his merits glare. But who walks with him, dares to take his arm, slap him on the shoulder, tweak his ear, buy him a Coca-Cola or a beer, pooh-pooh his politics, call him a fool? Perhaps, who knows, he tires of looking down with eyes never lifted up, never straight. Perhaps sometimes he tires of being great in solitude without a hand to hold." Now, that, as I said, there are about 30 of those books. They're filled with this type of literature. I want to pull this one out because I think the idea relates with this one so well. This is the first book that I brought home. This is a Scott Sporsman Basic Reader. Christianity is mentioned in this book repeatedly. There's several stories, several essays that refer to Christianity, and in every single one, Christianity is referred to in a very disparaging manner. Now, if this is balance, I'd like to see someone explain it. Not once do I find Christianity anywhere in this book described in any way but the most disparaging manner. All right, this is a poem called "Christ Climbed Down." And I'll read just the last verse. This is a poem that suggests that Christ is running away from the problems of the world. It's my understanding of it. And this is the last verse. "Christ climbed down from his bare tree this year and softly stole away into some anonymous Mary's womb again, where in the darkest night of everybody's anonymous soul he awaits again an unimaginable and impossibly immaculate reconception, the very craziest of second comings." There's a story then over here about a boy who came across an account of the life of Christ in the outline of history by H.G. Wells, and because of what he read, he became fearful. Now, this is a boy who went to church, had gone to church all of his life. He believed in God. He believed what his Sunday school teacher had taught him and what the preacher had taught him about life after death. And he didn't like the thought of dying, but he had confidence in the fact that he would live even after death. But he came across this account of H.G. Wells about the life of Christ, and he became very concerned that there was no life after death. First, he goes to his mother for comfort because she's a Christian, and he asks her, and she tells him, "Well, son, everybody has to die someday. I mean, that's just part of living." She doesn't believe in life after death, and the boy was, very shocked to find this out. So then he goes to the minister who preaches such beautiful sermons about heaven and about the terrors of hell. And he finds out that the minister doesn't believe it at all. He admits to him that it doesn't mean anything. He really doesn't believe it. It's just something he preaches. Now, this is the account that the boy does not like going to church. He doesn't like all the farce of Christianity. But he does it because he wants to have his soul saved someday. But this is what he really thinks about Christianity. David had been looking for the passage where Jesus says to one thief on the cross, "Today shalt thou be with me in paradise." He had never tried reading the Bible for himself before. What was so embarrassing about being caught at it was that he detested the apparatus of piety, fusty churches, creaking hymns, ugly Sunday school teachers, and their stupid leaflets. He hated everything about them but the promise they held out. A promise that, in the most perverse way, as if the homeliest crone in the kingdom were given the prince's hand, made every good and real thing, ball games, jokes, and pert-breasted girls possible. This is typical of the stories in this book. And it is amazing how often Christianity gets in here. We think Christianity or religion's out of the school. It's not in any sense. It's in here in full force. Here's a story of Darwin and his friend Fitzroy. Fitzroy was a believer after Darwin became an atheist. And in this story, again, Darwin, of course, is the hero. Everybody learns the Darwin finds the truth, and everyone admires him, and he's a great hero. And Fitzroy, his friend, who remains a believer, finally becomes disillusioned and then commits suicide. So Christianity loses out in that account. All right, What I Believe by E.M. Foster. He says, faith to my mind is a stiffening process, a sort of mental starch, which ought to be applied as sparingly as possible. I dislike the stuff. I do not believe in it for its own sake at all. Herein I probably differ from most people who believe in faith, or who believe in belief, and are only sorry they cannot swallow even more than they do. My lawgivers are Eramus and Montague, not Moses and St. Paul. My temple stands not upon Mount Moriah, but in the Elysian field, where even the immoral are admitted. My motto is, Lord, I disbelieve, help thou my disbelief. This has quite a bit in it that I have underlined and marked, but he concludes by saying, such a change, claim the Orthodox, this is a change in the world for the better, claim the Orthodox can only be made by Christianity and will be made by it in God's good time. Man always has failed and always will fail in organizing his own goodness, and it is presumptuous of him to try. This claim, solemn as it is, leaves me cold. I cannot believe that Christianity will ever cope with the present worldwide mess, and I think that such influence as it retains in modern society is due to the money behind it rather than to its spiritual appeal. It is a spiritual force. It was a spiritual force once, but the indwelling spirit will have to be restated if it is to calm the waters again, and probably restated in a non-Christian form. Naturally, a lot of people, and people who are not only good but able and intelligent, will disagree here. They will vehemently deny that Christianity has failed, or they will argue that its failure proceeds from the wickedness of men and really proves its ultimate success. They have faith with a large F. My faith has a very small one, and I only intrude it because these are strenuous and serious days, and one likes to say what one thinks while speech is comparatively free. It may not be free much longer. This also has the story of, what is his name? I don't have it marked. What is his name? Christian Brown? It slipped my mind. But anyway, it's a story of hypocrites. It's a story by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's a very good story in and of itself. Young Goodman Brown and Goody Brown, right, that's it. And it's a very good story in and of itself. It can be taken either as the hypocrisy of the church or else his own evil and corrupt nature gaining control. But nevertheless, here again is the hypocrisy of Christianity. There is nothing in this book from beginning to end that in any way portrays Christianity except as hypocritical, as failure, and I haven't read all the examples by any means. But that's all. That's the only way it's portrayed. I asked the teachers at the board meeting, that first board meeting we had, meeting with the teachers and on the adoption committee who selected these books, to find a book for me out of this man's series that was something that was patriotic, because I'd say they were anti-American and against patriotism, and so I requested that one of the teachers find something. Well, one of the teachers got up and walked over and picked up a whole stack of the books and started flipping through them. Finally, she pulled out this one, War and Peace, and she used this as an example of a patriotic book. It seems to me that night that she didn't read anything, of course, she read a few titles, and one of the titles she called, I'm almost certain, was Speaking the Hero, because it sounds very patriotic, and I almost hear her saying it, but I won't say for sure that she did. But anyway, here's Speaking the Hero from this patriotic book. I did not want to go, they inducted me. I did not want to die, they called me yellow. I tried to run away, they court-martialed me. I did not shoot, they said I had no guts. They ordered the attack. A shrapnel tore my guts. I cried in pain, they carried me to safety. In safety I died, they blew taps over me. They crossed out my name, they buried me under a cross. They made a speech in my hometown. I was unable to call them liars. They said I gave my life. I had struggled to keep it. They said I set an example. I had tried to run. They said they were proud of me. I had been ashamed of them. They said my mother should also be proud. My mother cried. That I wanted to live. They called me a coward. I died a coward. They called me a hero. There's another poem in here that I don't have to turn to. I've memorized it already. Mr. Fike mentioned this one just recently. It's bomb. This one is to be read aloud. The book specifies to be read aloud. Bomb A, bomb B, bomb C, bomb D, bomb E. If you want to hear the rest of it. Anyway, it ends bomb Z. That's it. That's the whole poem. Everything in here, there's a lot, as Mr. Fike pointed out in his article for all of you who may have seen it, everything in here just about is on the horrors of war, never indicating that a war might be justified, that a war might be fought for a good cause, that something might be worth fighting for or worth saving. Now here's another patriotic piece. Dooley is a traitor. So then you won't fight. Yes, Your Honor, I said, that's right. Now is it that you simply aren't willing, or have you a fundamental moral objection to killing, says the judge, blowing his nose. and making his words stand to attention in long rows. I stand to attention too, but with half a grin. In my time, I've done a good many in. No objection at all, sir, I said. There's a deal of the world I'd rather see dead, such as Johnny Stubbs or Fred Settle, or my last landlord, Mr. Syme. Give me a gun and your blessing, your honor, and I'll be killing them all the time. And he also goes on to say that he could kill this honorable judge sitting here if he had anything against him a lot easier than he could these little brown people that he's supposed to go off and shoot, and he has nothing against these people. And he goes on then on the next page to refer to war as Christian murder. And then there's a poem in here that makes reference again to Christ, and it says that Christ said that when one sheep was lost, the rest didn't mean anything anymore. Now that's the typical way that they represent Christianity. Now, let's see, I had one. Let's see. All right, now this is about the flag. And I want you to listen to now, talk about respect for the flag. I want you to listen how this is a 4th grade book. This would be 10th grade. Okay, talking about symbols. What about the flag? What about flags? Are they pieces of cloth that you can buy for almost any price you care to spend? Or are they the country they symbolize? If a flag falls down in the street and somebody tramples on it, is it a piece of cloth that got dirty, perhaps hopelessly, so that it's ruined and you'll have to spend money to replace it like a sugar bowl? Or is it a vital blow to the country it stands for? Obviously, it's not a vital blow to the country it stands for. Does it matter whether the trampling was deliberate or accidental? Would you risk your life to save a flag? Now, if you think they're suggesting that you should, we'll turn to the teacher's manual and see what the teacher's manual says. The teacher's manual says, there's a picture here, a painting of a flag on a wall in this book. It's full page. The teacher's manual says, pretend that this flag was just painted on a wall and someone told you that they were going to wash it off. How would you feel? What would you do? Does it make a difference as to what the flag is made of? Well, you're not going to go out and fight if someone paints a picture of a flag on the wall and they want to wash it off, are you? Are you going to fight if someone wants to burn one in the streets? We had a lot of burning flags in the streets. Now that's the kind of respect they teach for our country, for the symbol that represents our country. It's not worth fighting for. Parents don't punish their children as often or severely as they once did, but not so long ago the punishment for saying, quote, dirty words, unquote. Of course, they don't believe words are dirty, so they have to put in quotation marks. For, quote, having a dirty mouth, unquote, was to wash that dirty mouth with soap. And if by any chance that remedy really works, please go promptly to the nearest supermarket, buy a good whisk broom, and brush the cobwebs from your mind. For your mind is full of words, and words are the commonest symbols of all, the most misleading, the most often confused with the things they symbolize. There's one little short page in the Man series about dirty words and about a dirty word being locked up in a closet and how vicious it is and all, because it's locked up and it's not used. And then when the child grows up into a man and finally the child dies, then the dirty word dies. And anyway, the idea is that it's not threatening and it's not dangerous. It's just that you're locking it up and trying to avoid it. Now, this particular series of books, there's one 7th through the 12th grade, and they point out in here that, that there are many dialects. English, by the way, standard English, proper speaking of English, which we think we send our children to school to learn, is a dialect. And children are to learn to speak so-called standard English as a second dialect. But anyway, they wanted to use an example in here of informal language. Now, there are a lot of examples we could use of informal language, if that's all we wanted in the textbook. But I want you to listen to the examples they use. Here's the first one. Here's a 24-year-old, sounds like a dropout of some sort. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to read the first paragraph, pick up the first sentence and the rest of the paragraph, and then read the last paragraph, and that will cover it pretty well. I don't notice the world. I'm very bored. I really don't know how I feel. I'm nice and cordial, but people sense something about me. I don't know. Maybe I don't like them. Maybe I feel I'm above them. I can't think of anyone I love or respect. I can't be bothered with the news. I just can't get interested. I can't care less. I should care. It's terrible. She laughs. Vietnam, isn't that a shame? My interest in life is me. I hope I'll make it. I'm not too crazy about children. I'm worried about the next couple of years. Nothing touches me. If I were God, I'd make a world with lots of me's in it. Then she says, I love my building. I just love it. If I'm on a bus going to my mother's, I look at these people and I get a nauseous feeling. On Michigan Avenue, I respect them more. Home gives me a sick feeling. It's a shame Negroes don't like me and children don't like me and dogs don't run up to me. Now, the next example, these are simply examples of informal speech. There's, in the teacher's manual, there's no real discussion of views about the speaker and what the speaker's saying. These are to try to identify the age of the speaker, guess, if you can tell something about him the way he speaks. Okay. I'm going to read this whole thing to you. Why should I worry about the world? I figure it this way. Who's going to take care of you? Nobody. And you figure these people that don't want to take care of you and you ain't got no education, what are you going to do? I wasn't learning nothing in this school, nothing at all. Just sit back, watch the teacher say something and whatnot. He never asked me to say anything. He never told me to do nothing. Just as soon as the bell rings, go to another class. That was it. I even asked one teacher, what's this? And he wouldn't even answer me. It was a drag. What are you going to do? You're going to be walking the streets, so I figured like this. If I can't make money the right way, I'm sure going to make it the wrong way. I'll be living in jail, half laughs. That's my next home. Oh, that's my home, that's my next home. Because look it, if I pull a job, I have it real nice, if I get away with it. If I don't get away with it, I'm in jail. What can I do in the street? I don't want to be walking the street, because you walk the street, you see these young guys like they want to go bum hunting. They just might grab you one of these days and beat you up. So I figure like this, why walk the street and look for your dimes and nickels and pennies on the sidewalk when you can be robbing? And if you rob and get away with it, you're lucky. But you can't be robbing all your life and then don't get caught, so you figure like this, you're going to spend a couple of times in jail. But you ain't got no education, so that's it. It don't bother me, because I don't really care about the world, and the world don't care about me. Now that's their example of informal speech. There are several other examples. For the most part, they're depressive. They're this type of thing, not as bad as those first two. There's pictures of doors with each one. The doors don't necessarily relate in any way to the picture, but they're just the doors that are damaged, in need of repair. One looks like it's got holes knocked in it, weeds growing up around it. Another one looks like it has blood stains on it. These books are filled with pictures that you can't. They're just weird-looking pictures. They don't make sense, except you use your imagination on them, and you can get kind of some pretty wild ideas with your imagination sometimes what these pictures have. But they're full of just far-out, weird-looking pictures. Speaking of patriotism, they have in this book a full-page picture here. Looks like something like a billboard. There's a couple of pictures there, maybe one interposed on the other. There's a bread line, or people standing in a line here, apparently a bread line, maybe waiting for food. They've got buckets and sacks and so forth. There's a family in a car. It's a billboard or something in the background there, and then it says, world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. This picture is used to illustrate this particular chapter, which is the euphemism, telling it like it isn't. Now, telling it like it isn't is that there's no way like the American way, and that we have the world's highest standard of living, and they call that a euphemism, telling it like it isn't. They also say, well, this isn't the book, I'll get to that in a minute. All right, here's a chapter on the language of white racism, and this one begins, whereas many blacks have demonstrated an increased sensitivity to language and an awareness of the impact of words and phrases upon both black and white listeners, the whites of this nation have demonstrated little sensitivity to the language of racial strife. Then the very next sentence begins with Whitey. Whitey has for too long been speaking and writing in terminology which, often being offensive to the blacks, creates hostility and suspicion and breaks down communication. Well, there's truth in this to some extent. White people do offend black people. Black people offend white people sometimes. I don't think we need to be emphasizing this in a textbook, but it's certainly not true that all white people set out to offend black people. It's certainly not true that all white people are insensitive and unaware of racial terminology. And then to have a chapter on the language of white racism, and then in this chapter to refer to white people as whitey, is not in quotation marks or italics or anything else. It's just part of the typing or the regular set print here. And about 2 or 3 times they refer to white people as whitey. In here they quote Eldridge Cleaver in some of his writings. And Eldridge Cleaver was a rapist, convicted of rape, several rapes, numerous rapes that he was guilty of by his own admission. He was a high-ranking officer in the Black Panthers, which called for the violent overthrow of our government. I don't know if they still exist to what extent. After Robert Kennedy was killed, the Black Panthers produced a picture of a dead pig, or Robert Kennedy represented as a dead pig. Now this is the kind of man that they put in these books, and I have an example of some of his writing that is just pure filth, something I can't read it. And if there's a man who wants to volunteer to read it, fine, I can't read this. His writings in this particular book are just so filthy. Then they have another chapter here on the rapping in the black ghetto. Now, WCHS made the remark that I said these books are sympathetic to blacks and unsympathetic to whites. I have never said that. I didn't say that. I don't think they're sympathetic to blacks. I think they're insulting to blacks. I think they are intended to demean and put down black children and make them feel inferior, because I think they intend to make them feel put down, incapable of getting out of a unfair or downtrodden situation, and as a result feel rebellious and feel hatred toward white people. Now, these books are not sympathetic to blacks at all. They are demeaning and cheapening to them, and then they hit, so many of them hit on this hatred of all white people and of America, of Western civilization. But anyway, here's one. This is rapping in the black ghetto. So they use examples of terms such as shucking and running it down. For shucking, here's what they use for an example of shucking. Now this has no comment one side or the other to suggest any disfavor to this, but listen to what they say. Some field illustrations of shucking to get out of trouble came from some 7th grade children from an inner city school in Chicago. The children were asked, presumably by their teachers in the classroom, since the children were in the school in Chicago, the children were asked to talk their way out of a troublesome situation. Here are the situations they were given. You are cursing at this old man and your mother comes walking down the stairs. She hears you. To talk your way out of this, I'd tell her that I was studying a scene in school for a play. What if you were in a store stealing something and the manager caught you? I would start stuttering, then I would say, oh, I forgot, here the money is. Then, as an example of running it down, Edith is a saved broad who can't marry out of her religion or do anything else out of her religion for that matter, especially what I wanted her to do. A vogue religion man, so dig, for the last couple of weeks I've been quoting the good book and all that stuff to her, telling her I'm now saved myself. You dig? Now here, they give an example of cop a plea, means to plead for mercy. Here's the example they give. Please, cop, don't hit me, I give. Every time. Policemen are often mentioned in these books too. I have never yet seen a policeman mentioned in a respectful way in any of these books I have up here, including this basic English text series, in which some boy refers to the policeman as stupid cop behind his back. He acts respectful to his face. When the policeman turns his back and walks away, the boy says, stupid cop. I haven't seen a policeman in a single one of these books represented in any way but the most disparaging manner. So, okay, the night before my hearing, I decided to make a prayer. It had to be on my knees, because if I was going to cop a plea to God, I couldn't play it cheap. Here's verbal contest, examples of verbal contest, in which the players strive to bury one another in, in the play, the opponent's mother is especially slandered. Then, in turn, fathers are identified as queer, syphilic, sisters are whores, brothers are defective, cousins are funny, and the opponent himself is diseased. Now, here's the book I was talking about. I got this one yesterday. I've had some of these. This is from the series called Interaction. Did I have one of these a while ago? Anyway, there's about 100 or more, maybe 150 or even 200 of these books in all different sizes, like this. There's this one's also from the Interaction series. This is non-graded. It would be used now they have numbers on the front, but I asked about this and I was told they were non-graded. It's to be used at the teacher's discretion for her students from 7th through the 12th grade. This one I picked up yesterday. There's an article in here, the second article in here is by Eldridge Cleaver. Now this is the one that is just so, the terminology he uses, it's utterly filthy. It's so explicit. It's about sexual intercourse, and I won't read this one, but you're welcome to see it later. Now, the next story in here is by Germaine Greer, and it's the female eunuch. In this one, she urges that women should refuse to marry and refuse legal marriage. They should refuse to tie themselves with this horrible bondage of marriage. If she says, what does the average girl marry for? The answer will probably be made for love. Love can exist outside of marriage. Indeed, for a long time, it was supposed that it always did. Love can take many forms. Why must it be exclusive? Then if a woman marries because she wants to have children, she might reflect that the average family has not proved to be a very good breeding ground for children. And seeing as the world is in no urgent need of her increase, she might do better for contraception. It's very possible to wait until some suitable kind of household presents itself. And she suggests then that the average home is not a fit place for rearing of children. Anyway, her idea is that she should go ahead and live with whomever she pleases, but just not bother to marry and get herself all tied up legally. It's very disparaging toward the role of mother. It's very disparaging toward all men. And then in the middle of it here in large black letters, or in black bold print, they have this little insert here. All that is good and commendable now existing would continue to exist if all marriage laws were repealed tomorrow. I have an inalienable constitutional and natural right to love whom I may, to love as long or as short a period as I can, to change that love every day if I please. That's quite a long article. The next one in here is by Sigmund Freud, and this one is Character and Anal Eroticism, and this is another one I couldn't possibly read. And that should be for children from 7th through 12th grade. The teacher's discretion. I'm going to read this one, and I don't think there's... All right, this is one. It's called At Lunchtime, A Story of Love. When the bus stopped suddenly to avoid damaging a mother and child in the road, the young lady in the green hat sitting opposite was thrown across me, and not being one to miss an opportunity, I started to make love with all my body. At first she resisted, saying that it was too early in the morning and too soon after breakfast, and that anyway she found me repulsive. But when I explained that this being the nuclear age, the world was going to end at lunchtime, she took off her green hat, put her bus ticket in her pocket, and joined in the exercise. The bus people, and there were many of them, were shocked and surprised and amused and annoyed. But when the word got around that the world was coming to an end at lunchtime, they put their pride in their pockets with their bus tickets and made love one with another. And even the bus conductor, being over, climbed into the cab and struck up some sort of relationship with the driver. That night on the bus coming home, we were all a little embarrassed, especially me and the young lady in the green hat. And we started to say in different ways how hasty and foolish we had been. But then, always having been a bit of a lad, I stood up and said, it was a pity that the world didn't nearly end every lunchtime, and that we could always pretend. And then it happened. Quick as a crash, we had all changed partners, and soon the bus was a quiver with white mothball bodies doing naughty things. And the next day, and every day, in every bus, in every street, in every town, in every country, people pretended that the world was coming to an end at lunchtime. It still hasn't, although in a way it has. Now that's the whole thing. I have omitted nothing, so I surely haven't pulled it out of context. And anyway, how do you take something like that out of any kind of context? Now here's an example of kind of poetry we're going to introduce our children to. Yeah, I dig. Y-E-A-H-H. You're supposed to be hip. Yeah, I know. When you see a black cat with a fey chick, you don't flip. Yeah, I dig. You're supposed to be avant-garde. Yeah, I know. When Leroy Rapp, Stokely blow truth, you don't find them too hard. Yeah, I dig. Yeah, I dig. Some of your best friends are Negroes. You entertain them at your parties until the last white guest goes. Yeah, I dig. You were in the civil rights bag long time ago down south. Yeah, I dig. You know all about spades and you want to help them. So, yeah, I dig. Yeah, I dig. But what I don't dig is why do you refuse and frown when I tell you to take up a gun like your own white John Brown? And why do you get uptight or cop out funny whenever I even mention giving me some money? Yeah, I dig. Yeah, I really do dig. So that one is just suggesting the whites take up a gun and join with the revolutionary blacks. This one is Black Voices. This is, I just lost a page. Yeah, here it is. This one is one of just a number of novels, a box full of novels. Some of them are fine. Christie's, and there's one I recall because I happen to like Christie. There's a lot of them that are fine. But so often, these books, or I have found it true, that when they, are supposedly the black literature, they omit people like Roy Wilkins, who are the more moderate, the people who are really working for a peaceful solution to racial problems and this type of thing. And they, of course, go to the radicals and the extremists and the haters. But anyway, here's a poem. Strolling down Claiborne in the wrong end of town, Joe saw two policemen knock a poor gal down. He didn't know her at all, never saw her before, but that didn't make no difference to my old boy Joe. Walks up to the cops and very polite asked them if they thought they had done just right. One cracked him with his billy above the left eye, one thugged him with his pistol and let him lie. When he woke up and knew what the cops had done, went to the hot shop and bought himself a gun. Felt more out of sorts than ever before, so he went on a rampage, my old boy Joe. I can't read, this is written in dialect. Shot his way to the station house, rushed right in, wasn't nothing but space where the cops had been. They called the reserve and the National Guard. Joe was in a cell overlooking the yard. The machine gun sputtered, didn't faze Joe at all, but every time he fired, a cop would fall. The tear gas made him laugh, and when they let it fly, laughing gas made him hang his head and cry. He threw the hand grenades back with an out-shoot drop, and every time he threw, there was one less cop. The chief of police said, "What kind of man is this?" and held up his shirt for an armistice. "Stop gunning, black boy, and we'll let you go. I thank you very kindly," said my old boy Joe. "We promise you safety if you'll leave us be." Joe said, "That's agreeable, sir, by me." The sun had gone down, the air was cool. Joe stepped out on the pavement, a fighting fool. Had walked from the jail about half a square when a cop behind a post let him have it fair. Put a bullet in his left side and one in his thigh, but Joe didn't lose his shooting eye. Drew a cool bead on the cop's broad head. "I return your favor," and the cop fell dead. The next to last words he was heard to speak was just what you would look for from my boy Joe Meek. Spoke real polite to the folks standing by. "Would you please do me one kindness before I die? Won't be here much longer to bother you, so would you bring me a drink of water before I go?" The very last word he was heard to say showed a different Joe talking in a different way. "If my bullets weren't gone and my strength all spent, I'd send the chief something with a compliment, and we'd race to hell, and I'd best him there like I would have done here if he had played me fair." Now, this book is full of stuff like that from beginning to end. Here's a poem on Booker T. Washington, a man who is worthy of admiration and respect. And it's about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And of course, Booker T. is ridiculed, put down, disparaged, and I won't read this because, it's quite long, and you're welcome to read it. But he is ridiculed, disparaged, and put down, and W.E.B. Du Bois is, of course, the hero. And W.E.B. Du Bois was certainly of a very leftist political philosophy. But they tear down the black hero, or many of the old black heroes. Here's something that's in a description of America. "These streets stretch from one end of America to the other, connect like a maze from which very few can fully escape. Despair sits on this country in most places like a charm. But there's a special gray death that loiters in the streets of the urban Negro slum." Now, I don't know if you think despair sits on this country in most places like a charm, but I don't. Okay, the fear, frustration, and hatred that Negroes have always been heir to in America. It is just that in the cities where there was once a black man's 20th century Jordan promise is a dying bitch with rotting eyes. And then it goes on to say, "But it's hard enough to be a human being under any circumstances, but when there's an entire civilization determined to stop you from being one, things get a little more desperately complicated. What can you do then? You can stand in doorways late at night and hit people in the head." And then it goes on, you can go to church on Sunday, or you can stick a needle in your arms. It just gets very depressive. And every time they represent black people in these books, they always represent them as living in the slums. They're the failures in life. There's a middle-class black society. There are successful black people. Why aren't any of these people held up for admiration to these children? It's because they don't want them to have people to admire. They want them to feel put down and abused and mistreated, so they will turn to the Eldridge Cleavers, the Malcolm X, and the others that hate whites and call for the end and the destruction of all white civilization, or all Western civilization. Now, this one, again, this is African Images. This is by McGraw-Hill. It's another set of, just novels and such. And here they say, and this from beginning to end there's a big long story in here on professed Christianity, when they point out all the farces of the preachers, and the only sin that the preacher really recognizes is the sin of sex, and some of them don't take that too seriously. They preach it for other people. African infatuation with the West became less enthusiastic and more reasoned as Western ideals steadily revealed themselves to black intellectuals like Sidar Senghor of Senegal as being bankrupt and self-serving and hypocritical. Senghor was influenced by the existentialists in France, by Marxism, by European surrealists, who were also deeply disillusioned by European values. But most of all, Senghor was influenced by black intellectuals in America who never really wholly accepted Western ethics because of their routine acquaintance with them. It goes on to say then, in the United States, well, it mentions the names of some of these things. I can't read, it's a French name. Leon Damas and Claude McKay were among the most articulate of these critics. In the United States, black people struggled from the very beginning against white domination, and the most persuasive and potent movement was the Black Power movement, which furiously exploded American bigotry, a movement which resulted in such independent-minded groups as the Black Panthers and the Black Muslims. And then there's a poem that follows this immediately. And now we got us a resolution, because I see the face of things to come. Yeah, your Constitution, well, my friends, it's going to have to bend. I'm here to tell you about destruction of all the evil that will have to end. Some folks are going to get the notion, I know, they'll say I'm preaching hate. But if I have to swim the ocean, well, I would just to communicate. It's not as simple as taking jive, the daily struggle just to stay alive, singing about a revolution because we're talking about a change. It's more than just evolution. Well, you know what you got to clean your brain. The only way that we can stand, in fact, is when you get your foot off our back. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that black people have not been mistreated and abused in many ways, and there have been things to correct. But they're not the only race that's been mistreated and abused. They're not the only people that have ever come to this country that have had to face prejudice. Other people have had to do it. But at this time, I know of no country on earth that has tried harder to correct any abuse or any mistreatment of a minority race than this country has done. I know of no country that bends over backwards or goes farther in trying to be fair to a minority people than this country has. And if there's anything we don't need to do in school, is to constantly emphasize racial hatred and racism at all. Why in the world do we have to, in class, constantly emphasize to these children, you are black, you are white, and constantly hit on the differences and make them so conscious of this racism? I think racial pride should come from home, and I don't think it's the job of the schools to be instilling racial pride. I think the schools ought to teach these children to have national pride, be proud of being Americans and appreciate it. Now this goes for about 3 pages. It's paragraphs here interspersed with poems. I went to the employment office, I got me a number and got in line. They called everybody's number, but they never did call mine. They say if you're white, you'll be all right. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. Now, then they have a paragraph. They intersperse this poem with paragraphs like this. A Negro lay a block east on Broadway with his face beaten in. He was not dead. An ambulance driven by white men dashed up. If you pick up that skunk, we'll kill you, cried the crowd. I've got a wife and 4 children at home, said the white-faced ambulance man as he climbed back in the wagon. When the fire had eaten its way that far, the body was tossed into the flames. 2 blocks further east lay a Negro who had been beaten until he was dying. Let's string him up, shouted a man. A rope was brought, and the dying black in a moment was dangling from a pole. Several good-measure shots were fired into his body, and the crowd went further on. Me and a man were working side by side. This is what I meant. They were paying him $1 an hour. They was paying me 50 cents. They say if you're white, you'll be all right. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. One girl was standing at a window of a white woman's home in which she worked. Her arm was shot away. A policeman and a soldier, she said, did the shooting. An old woman, frightfully burned, dying in the hospital, was asked if the mob had done it, and replied, no, they just set fire to my house. I burned myself trying to get out. About 10 blocks of Negro homes were burned, and the mob stood outside and shot and stoned those who tried to escape. The mob seized a colored woman's baby and threw it into the fire. The woman was then shot and thrown in, and how any black child could read that and not hate white people, I don't know. I don't think they're intended to. I think they're intended to read it and feel full of hate. This is followed up then by a poem that says, brought here in slave ships and pitched overboard, love your enemy. Language taken away, culture taken away, love your enemy. Work from sun up till sundown, love your enemy. Work for no pay, love your enemy. Last hired, first fired, love your enemy. Rape your mother, love your enemy. Lynch your father, love your enemy. Bomb your churches, love your enemy. Kill your children, love your enemy. It goes on for several more, about 4 or 5 inches there. And then it says, love, 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 love. Love for everybody else, but when will we love ourselves? And then it goes on with the, and I who sang with clenched fist and so forth. It just goes on and on and on. with this idea of revolution and what's to come. Here's another example, and I'm taking a lot. Here's another example of Americanism. This is students were told to act out for a play. They were to rehearse acting out, they were to say the Pledge of Allegiance, acting out in character they wanted to use, saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, this says that many played as young children who were made to recite the Pledge of Allegiance before school. This is scholastic journalism. It would be 10th, 12th, 11th, and 12th grade. All right, many of them acted as young children who were made to recite the Pledge of Allegiance before school. When the actor finished, the director called the name of another character. The actor repeated the pledge, this time using the actions and intonations the new character would have. After this process was repeated, the actor had to say the pledge continuously, interchanging characters when the director called for it. On the second day, a girl whose own character was a witch started out the pledge, this part of the exercise, this way. I pledge, and she screeches out with a long screech, allegiance, and then she laughs with witch's gestures, ha ha ha, to the flag. The director shouts, Viet Cong woman. Then she drops to the floor, rocking her body back and forth, her arm and wrapping her body with her arms and pronouncing each word with hatred, the United States of America. It goes on, then they sang America the Beautiful in any style they chose, and presumably they would use the same character styles when they did that. All right, I want to hurry through these as fast as I can. Here's a poem on Playboy. It has a big picture here of Marilyn Monroe next to it, right here. And this boy is a stockroom boy looking at a Playboy magazine. What so engrosses him, the wild decor of this pink-papered alcove into which a naked girl has stumbled with its rich welter of pelts and pillows on the floor. It ends then, this poem, which he's looking at, this picture ends by saying, and how the cunning picture holds her still. Did I say he's looking at the centerfold in Playboy? And how the cunning picture holds her still at just that smiling instant when her soul, grown faintly sweet and swept beyond control, consents to his inexorable will. Here's a poem. My sister leans over an apple basket all day and shouts her two-bit selling line. On the corner, my father and mother are singing tough tunes in my ear, and someday my whole profanity family will create a pigeon-toed still line. Here's what they have to say about middle-class life often. The middle class, you're trapped in the middle class, you can't get out of it, you're just... Here they say, there's no way out, you were born to waste your life, you were born to this middle class life. As others before, you were born to walk in procession to temple singing. That's just one on the middle class life. This one, all people in Chicago are brutal, vicious, hard, because this is about the Democratic Convention that was there. Mayor Daley is referred to as a pig, the police are referred to as a pig, and the people look upon the dead pig as their brother in heaven. That's the policeman who was shot. Here's one. Here's a story that it's called Chicken Hawk's Dream, and I won't take time to read it, but it begins just on a ridiculously depressive, meaningless story about a boy who's a dope addict who goes to school for not because he's getting anything out of it, because he can bum off his parents and doesn't have to work. And it ends on the same kind of note. It tells nothing. It has no plot. It just begins and it ends with nothing but this ridiculous story that our kids are supposed to waste their time on. Here, they talk about soft words that dull and deceive. The communist country's mass murder is concealed under such euphemism as purge and liquidation and undesirable elements. And they go on to talk about when Russian troops invaded and occupied Czechoslovakia in August of 1968, Soviet papers and newscasts referred to this invasion as simply the August events. And anyway, soft-pedaling what they had done. And then they take this and compare this. Immediately after Pearl Harbor was bombed, American citizens of Japanese ancestry were confined in concentration camps conveniently referred to as relocation centers. This happened in the United States. That's all. They don't tell why these people were confined. They don't tell them that our government confined these people, for one thing, to protect them. Because people in this country were so angry and bitter over the bombing of Pearl Harbor that people of Japanese ancestry were endangered. There's a world of difference in what our government did in confining these people and what the communists have done in their purges where they have killed literally millions of people, up to estimated 20, 30, 40 million people. Here's the kind of high-class material they want our children to read. This is called A&P. It's a a boy who works in an A&P store. He says he sees 3 girls come in bikinis. It was bright green, the seams on the bra were still sharp, and her belly was still pretty pale, so I guess she just got it, the bikini, I mean. Stokesy's married, with 2 babies chalked up to his fuselage already. Women are just, anybody who is adult is disparaged in this story. Women with their varicose vein legs and so forth. Policy is what the kingpins want. What the others want is juvenile delinquency. Then he says, I uncreased the bill, tenderly as you may imagine. She had taken a dollar bill out of the top of her bikini. Still with that prim look, she lifts a folded dollar bill out of the hole in the center of her nubbled pink top. The jar went heavy in my hand, really. I thought it was so cute. Then he says, I increased the bill tenderly as you may imagine. It just having come between 2 of the smoothest scoops of vanilla I had ever known were there, and passed a half and a penny into her narrow pink palm. And then there's another note here about a girl whose uncle steals her negligee and wears it around. And here's a suggestion. Now, this is the date, and I suppose this is a teenage girl's attitude toward her mother, is what it sounds like to me. If she don't hurry up and let me out of here, keeps piling up stuff for me to do, I ain't going to finish that ironing. She's got another thing coming. Hey, you, what you mean, talking about cleaning silver? It's 8 o'clock now, you fool. I'm leaving. Got something interesting on my mind. Don't mean night school. This whole book I have marked from end to end. Song in the Front Yard is about a girl who says she wants to go where the rough and untended and hungry weeds grow in the backyard. A girl gets sick of a rose. Then she says, my mother sneers, but I say it's fine now. They don't have to go into quarter tonight. Excuse me. She's talking about the children who live down the street. And they get to do everything they want to. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman. That George will be taken to jail sooner or later on account of last winter he sold our back gate. But I say it's fine, honest I do, and I'd like to be a bad woman too. And wear the braid stockings of night black lace and strut down the street with paint on my face. Could someone get me some water, please? Thank you. There's another poem in here about a boy growing up in the slums, and all he can think about is ripping the blouses off the women and running men down in a big Cadillac. And this one just goes on and on with the story about, here's a poem on freedom that's, well, gets quite an idea across. Freedom is not following a river. Freedom is following a river, though, if you want to. It is deciding now by what happens now. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's situation ethics. It is knowing that luck makes a difference. Most of the world are living, most of the world are living by creeds too old, chancy, and habit forming to be worth arguing about with reason. And they get this across all the time. The world's changing, new ideas are coming, and we've got to accept all the change.
What age is that?
This would be 10 through 12. This thing now. I don't think it would say that first. Oh, I hate to go on and on. I'm afraid you all are getting tired, but I haven't even begun to touch it, and I've got to tell you about the elementary books. Again, they wanted an example of ghetto speaking, to illustrate ghetto speaking, and of all the examples they could have used, here's the one they pull out, called Operation Javelin. This is a story about how a bully can take over the class, get the class on his side to drive the teacher crazy, because she just couldn't care less anymore about what happens, and then they take over with the little children and take advantage of them, take their money away from them, threaten them and so forth. Operation Javelin. I'm not going to read the black print, which is telling you what this all means. I'll just read the red. The tomcat begins with a stinging hit and sandbagging starts. Things are thrown, strange noises come out of nowhere, children are unresponsive. The tomcat tells all his tadpoles that it's time for the chicken to come home to become an eagle, and they had better trilly along because the sun is falling on its belly. The first step is to unzip the teacher, so the tomcat takes a long dive, she puts him in cold storage, so he can then dress her in red tresses. He and his friends get bold her and outflap her and scramble her daily. All morning they shoot her down with grease until finally she's ready for the big sleep. They continue the heartbeat kicks until they're sure she's frozen on the needle. The tomcat then decides to ring the scene. Now his glasses are on, his ashes have been hauled away. He sends hot cakes to some of the children demanding money. The rabbits know they will be erased unless they pay him. He tells them that he is a liberty looter, that's a good crook, who will protect them because he carries a big twig. 5-finger discount stealing pays off. The cockroaches crow. Poor Tiny Tim, her nerve ends are humming. Her fleas and bust heads have twisted the knob. The tomcat doesn't have to waste any more hit bullets on her. After all, a cat can't tell a dog what to do. He'll just keep his shoelaces tied. Hail the stinking king, and it goes on then. Well, that's pretty much the dialogue of the story. But There are many examples we could use for ghetto English, unless we want to put something across more than just an example of the language. And they illustrate this with a picture of a little boy, and here showing us, or a couple of little boys showing their muscles. And over here, a couple of teenage boys looking like they're full of hatred and bitterness. These books, now, these, I want to point out to this series and this series. We're not talking about literature books now. These are not literature books. These are English texts. These are supposedly teaching English. And the thing they want to teach your child is that every dialect is of equal validity, that we won't have true equality. They say this in the teacher's manual in one of these series, this one. They say that we won't have true equality in this country until we recognize all dialects as being of equal validity. They intend for our children to learn with these books. Now, I don't know what the teachers intend. Let me point out that I don't even think the teachers on the textbook committee read these books. I don't believe they could have picked them if they read them, but now they're in a position of having to defend them. It's unfortunate, but that's what they're doing, I think. I don't believe they knew what they were picking. I don't think they read them. I think they listened to a sales talk, possibly. But I had rather think that they didn't know than that they did this deliberately. But these books point out that, in this one, that black or ghetto children will pick up standard English as a second dialect. We're not going to teach them to speak correct English. We're never going to suggest that there's a right way to speak and a wrong way to speak. We're going to teach them to speak standard English as a second dialect, and middle-class children are going to learn a second dialect, ghetto dialect, and they'll learn to communicate in this second dialect. And we won't have true equality until all dialects are of equal validity, and they say this right here in this book. Now, with regard to the teaching of English, there's one more I've got here. Oh, they also say in here, these books are extremely politically slanted. They never mention politics and politicians without doing it disparagingly. All politics are all politicians are crooks. And of course, if our political system is, if everyone who is in office, and it seems right now maybe a lot of them are, but anyway, it seems if our whole system is that far gone, and we can't trust politicians, and we can't trust our system, and we can't trust a political system to, direct this country, then what else do we have? We can go to a dictatorship. That's all that it leaves us. But every time they mention politicians, it's always disparagingly. They say in here that they have a whole chapter on Robert Welch and John Birch Society, and they point out that the Birch Society makes a big issue and says, communists, there are communists in this country and we're in danger of being overthrown by communism and so forth. They point out that there is no international communist conspiracy and we have nothing to fear from communists, that this is just a farce. Now, here they say, on the teaching of English, and I wrote a letter to the Gazette and suggested that if we were going to follow this approach to the teaching of English, and again, this is an English textbook, that I'd just as soon get rid of all English teachers, throw out the course, and not teach English anymore. That's what this book suggests. And listen to what they say. It would be a good deal better if schools did not teach English as such, but rather only how to use English in the study of history or poetry or economics. Then he goes on down here to say, I am well aware that most schoolmasters today are doing much better with Jerry than they did with me, what with set theory and mathematics, more thingamabobs, and less rote learning. I hope they stoutly resist all attempts by ignorant taxpayers to push them back into the little red schoolhouse, the utopia of ultra-conservatives. So they have, here's a good example. The reason we don't get along with the communists, they point out in here, are because we don't understand each other. That our differences, and it's not ideological differences, it's because we don't understand each other. If we understood each other, we'd get along better. If our language didn't handicap our thinking, if we weren't tied in, bound down by our language, if we could free ourselves from our language, we'd understand each other a lot better. They say here that there was a time once when, assuming the story is correct, I believe that it is the surface moral is obvious, he says. Don't back down in confronting a bully. Now, this is the moral of when Hitler marched over Munich, that they should not have backed down. Chamberlain shouldn't have backed down in confronting Hitler. Well, he says the moral is obvious. There was a time when it was perfectly right to say don't back down in confronting a bully. He goes on with all of this, then, this page, to say that there was such a time as this. But today, in 1974, is not 1968. The material I've been reading here and telling you that this comes from 10th grade, or this is from, I don't know if I've even told you the grade level, 6th grade or 11th grade. They use it in this series as non-graded material, so it could fall into 7th grade, 8th grade, anywhere in there. Now, this is the one thing. This particular book is the only book I have found in this whole series that deals with the black people above the ghetto level, that takes any of them that in any way have been materially successful, the kind that would appear to be, you know, somebody the children might look up to, the young people might admire, look up to, want to be like. And this says, and I know, I tell you, I think some of our strongest, some of the strongest objections would and will come from the black community when they become acquainted with these books. We have a lot of black people in this county that are Christian people, dedicated to Christian principles, and I know they'd be appalled with some of this. But listen to this. On the whole, the tradition of the gentleman has ceased to have influence on either the manners or morals of the Negro community. In the Negro colleges, it is futile for teachers to exhort the students to behave like ladies and gentlemen. In the highest social circles, the tradition of the gentleman has become the source of amusement. Even when the term is used, it is quite devoid of meaning, since it refers neither to manners nor morals. They go on over here to say that divorce and promiscuity are actually status symbols among the elite of the black community. And where's the balance? If I'm taking something out of context, none of these books, never in any of these books have I yet, and I've read these books for I know well over 100 hours. I haven't found anything yet that holds up black people successfully in any way other than this one particular book. And that's what they say about men. And I don't want you all to think for a minute that we're talking about supplementary books, some of them. This is a basic series. And I don't want you to think for a minute that if we get rid of these supplementary books that we have taken care of the problem and everything goes okay. It isn't. The worst problem we're going to have is going to come right out of this basic series. And the reason is because it is not so blatant and so obvious. Our children will see those books and will see the biasness in them, the anti-Americanism in them, the racial hatred in them. These books are much more subtle in their approach. In this one, they say that they take up the matter of language. And I'm just going to refer to these things, and I'll show you, if you want to ask me about something specifically, if someone does, then I'll point these out to you. But they take up the matter of language, and they say we are handicapped by our language. We're forced by our language to think in terms of good and bad, right and wrong, and black and white. And the world isn't in terms of good and bad, black and white, and right and wrong. The world is in shades of gray. The Chinese philosopher, someone, they quote, points out that the Chinese language much more clearly tells what the world is really like because they see things in shades of gray. Now, I have always believed that I thought things were right and wrong, good and bad, black and white, because I'm a Christian and because that's what the Bible teaches. The Bible's very outspoken on many things being bad and wrong and other things being good and right. That's the reason I think like that. It's not because my language forces me to, but this English book says we think like this because our language handicaps us and we need to free ourselves from this handicap. And the Chinese see the world more clearly. Now, throughout, they use, for instance, there's another set of books that are fairly well, that I like pretty well, fairly well balanced books. I don't have any of them because I like them, there's no point in bringing them. But these books, well, they use examples. Well, for instance, they talk about reliability. You know, when can we trust something? When can we depend on it? When can we know that it's truthful? Now, here are the examples they use. A news story from the Communist Party press. Soviet leaders announced today that they are granting amnesty to several Soviet writers recently accused of counter-revolutionary propaganda. The teacher's manual says this is reliable. Then they say the source is biased, but it's informed. That's the reason it's reliable. Well, reliability is based more than upon information. It's based upon the soundness and the truthfulness of the witness, and I wouldn't call anything that comes out of the Communist Party press reliable information. But now they say it's reliable. John Hanson, Hollywood screen idol, strongly denounced a guaranteed annual income, indicating he plans to head an organization to fight the issue. This man is unreliable. He doesn't know what he's talking about because he doesn't have any basis for any information on this. Walter Stone, head of the Peach Growers Institute, indicated that he had secret information that the striking peach pickers were supported by communist funds. This is called unreliable. He doesn't know what he's talking about. What is the fact? They said the statement that there are angels in heaven, what is a report? The statement that there are angels in heaven is not a report because there's no factual information we can base this on. We can't know this. Well, the Bible says there are angels in heaven, and there is not a book in existence today that can be more firmly relied upon than the Bible, and the Bible says that there are angels in heaven, and we can more firmly prove the existence of Christ and the authenticity of the Bible and that God is its authorship than we can that George Washington is president of this country. Well, there's more information, there's a lot more evidence toward the authenticity of the Bible than there is to the fact that God is, George Washington was the president of this country, and the only way that you know he was president of this country is because you have books that tell you so. And some records and things that said we've been told that he signed. We believe it, of course, but we accept it on faith. But anyway, they point out that the Bible is not, that the report that there are angels in heaven is not a report that we can look to as information. It's just a statement. They use in here a poem. I've lost one of my books somewhere. I moved it somewhere. They use in here this poem by E.E. Cummings, and it's nothing but ridicule of America and ridicule of patriotism. Next, of course, of course, God, America, I love you, land of the pilgrims, so forth and so on. Say, can you see by the dawn's early, my country 'tis of centuries come and go, and are no more what of it we should worry, in every language, even deaf and dumb, thy sons acclaim thy glorious name, by glory, by jingle, by gee, by gosh, by gum. Why talk of beauty? What could be more beautiful than these heroic happy dead who rushed like lions to the roaring slaughter, who did not stop to think, they died instead. Then shall the voice of liberty be mute? He spoke and rapidly drank a glass of water. So that's as patriotic as it gets. And if you think I'm jambling words, I'm not. That's the way the thing reads. Let's see. I had a 5th grade basic English text. I can't find it now. But the 5th grade text has, they have examples of sentences, paragraphs, a topic paragraph to be written. And, or did I read that one? Maybe did I refer to this from the topic paragraph where they say, we are a nation without any heritage or any roots or any strong ties in history. We have no strong roots in community or church. Therefore, we have created myths to give us a feeling of continuity in this country. George Washington, brave leader, father of his country. Abraham Lincoln, for those who like their myths on the darker side. They also, in at least the 3rd grade book, these are, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say 3rd grade book at this point. I meant to say, these are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. That means 1 is 7th grade, 2 is 8th grade, 3 would be 9th grade. Either in the 7th or the 8th grade book, they have a chapter on writing your own story, or writing about yourself, or writing about your personal experiences. They suggest writing about your first fear, writing about your first, many things, different things, all very personal things that have happened to you. Write about the first time your parents disillusioned or disappointed you. And then they have examples, a whole chapter of examples of writing experience, personal experiences. And in every case they use, there are stories written by students about elderly people. And every time they refer to elderly people as nauseating them, irritating them, disgusting them. Every last time they're mentioned. An old man was sitting in the airplane next to me in the seat. Slava was drooling from his lips or his mouth as he was asleep. And at first it just disgusted me or something like that. And then I became nauseated and I got up and I ran to the back of the plane. Fear of death is constantly hit on. Old people make me think of death, and that's fearful and that's terrible. And there's a whole chapter that dwells on that. They use examples of ain't is used repeatedly in the 9th grade book, I believe it is, where 4 different times we're told that if your friends use ain't, it's perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable, and perfectly to be expected that you will use ain't. They also say that if your parents criticize the way you speak, then their parents criticize them, and their parents criticize them. That's the way it's always been. So now with these books, your children are going to find out that speaking correctly is just not very important at all. But with these books, even if you try to correct them at home, they're going to point out that if your parents try to correct you, parents have always done that. You don't take it too seriously. Now, I don't want you to think that this is 7th through 12th grade only. I want to take up now, and I'm covering this line. And these are only some of the books. But I want to take up what they do with these books. They look so perfectly innocent in these elementary grades. From kindergarten right on up through the entire elementary program, there's an undermining of faith in God and faith in the stories of the Bible and the principles that we try to teach our children. They take an innocent story like Jack and the Beanstalk, and this is a particularly gruesome story about Jack and the Beanstalk. Personal notes. And it's more gory than most of us would tell the story anyway to our children. But after they tell this horrible story about Jack and the Beanstalk, about how, this giant really does eat little boys. He just had one yesterday to eat, in the second grade children. Then the teacher's manual suggests, now the teacher's manual, not the child's book, so if you go down to school and look at your child's book, it's going to be an innocent little story about Jack and the Beanstalk. But the teacher's manual suggests, have the children to debate, was it right, or did Jack do wrong in stealing from the giant? Well, I don't know any second grade child who could read that story or have it read to them about Jack and the Beanstalk and how this awful giant eats little boys and how he is so cruel and everything. And poor Jack and his mother, they're poor, they need things, they're really starving, and they have nothing. How could any little second grade child read that and think that it was wrong to steal from that giant? So, all right, there's a little inroad. Here's a case where it was wrong to steal. Thou shalt not steal isn't always necessarily true. Then they're told to role play that they are gods, and if you were a god, what kind of world would you create, they're told. These, from beginning to end, every one of these stories, the children are, they put themselves into the place of the actors, and they role play the activities, which is fine. Role playing is fine for children to a certain extent. But then they always have to tell their own story, and they relate to this story in some way. Now here are some questions. Second grade children. Have you ever been punished, or have you ever disobeyed your parents and been punished? Why did you disobey them? What happened? Were you sorry? Why or why not? Have your parents ever punished you because they thought you had done something wrong when you really hadn't done it? What happened? How did you feel? Do you think you tend to be a good or a bad child? Why? In another case, they ask them, I'm not sure if it's second grade or third grade book, they say, did you ever think about running away from home, or did you ever try to run away from home? What happened? Tell about it, or did you ever want to run away from home? They mention in here, and again, the police are mentioned in these elementary books. I always had a very strong feeling about, you didn't say to a child, you be good or an old mean policeman's going to get you. You never suggested that to a child. But in here, they have the story about the fox, and they suggest that in discussing it afterwards, and this is in the teacher's manual, how do you think the fox talked? Would you think that it might be a good description? Let's see. Perhaps you would like to describe the way the fox talked in this way. Be careful not to open the bag, said the fox barked like a cross policeman. And then the next story is about the dangerous cowboy, and it's about Bad Benny, and he runs away from the sheriff, and the sheriff, of course, is a policeman in the background who's really not paying any attention to him in the story. And later over here, though, in the discussion, or in the book, they have something about the boy ran away from the policeman. And they're just little hints like that. Now, that's fairly mild, that one, and I haven't read this one too awfully closely, but they do suggest that, and no one is suggesting for a minute that children should be put down and embarrassed and humiliated because they use improper grammar. Everybody does. But the idea of a school is that we do teach correctly. We try to teach them how to speak correctly. But anyway, they say here in the teacher's manual, do not criticize the expression we have labeled non-standard. Well, I can't find the expression they've given right now. I don't see it. But anyway, it is appropriate among people who naturally speak that way, and it's not advisable for the pupils to go home putting on airs. Well, most of us would be delighted if our children would come home speaking correctly from school, speaking correct English, correcting our errors, and correcting the errors that we passed on to them. We'd be happy for them to. But they say in every one of these teachers' manuals, it's not advisable for these children to go home putting on airs and using correct English that's not used at home. Now, I don't have this one well marked, but I have it marked, but I don't have cards in it from every page. Yes, I do. They slip down in here. Okay, in this one, this is a third grade book now. We're third grade. This one, they take up the story. Well, they have a story first about the animals who talked and sang, and the crooks broke in the house, and the animals sang, and it scared them to death, and they ran away. Then they discuss the reality of the story. Could this be a real story? Well, obviously not, because animals don't sing and talk. Then they go into the next story is about Androcles and the lion, and how Androcles pulled a thorn out of the paw of a lion. And the lion then, later, when Androcles was thrown into the arena by the emperor, the lion remembered Androcles. The lion hadn't eaten for 3 days, but he remembered Androcles, and he appreciated what he had done by pulling the thorn out of his paw, so he ran up to Androcles and licked his cheek and wouldn't kill him. So the children discussed the reality of the story. Do you think a lion would really act this way? Does a lion do things like this? They discussed the reality of the story. The very next thing is then, this is teacher's manual. You could ask if anyone knows and wants to tell the story of Daniel in the lion's den. If it is told in any detail, you could then discuss any similarities between that story and Androcles and the lion. And the only conclusion that children could come to is that that Daniel in the lion's den has to be a myth or fable, because a lion just doesn't act that way. Now that's the reason the comparison is made. Then We have another story about a little boy stealing, and it's a very good story. If you read it in your child's book, it would impress you. A very good story written by James Stewart, and it's about the little boy cheating an old man out of a penny to buy some candy, and then he just almost chokes on the candy because his conscience is hurting so bad and he feels so guilty about it. But then they have over here talking about your own ideas, and this is in the child's book. Most people, they don't say it's wrong to cheat or it's wrong to steal. They say most people think that cheating is wrong, even if it's only to get a penny, which is what Sean did. Do you think there is ever a time when it might be right? Tell when it is. Tell why you think it is right. Now, they have telling your own fable. And this one is a story about an Indian myth about the Great Spirit coming down in the form of an old man going to live in a teepee, or going to visit the teepee of an old lady and asking her to bake him some bread. And she tells him that she will, and she bakes a loaf of bread, but the loaf's too big, she won't give it to him, and it goes on, and finally she won't bake him. She tells him to go to the woods and get his own food, so he punishes her. Then the children discuss the story. If you were a god, would you walk around on earth checking on people? Do you think the woman is very badly punished? Would you have punished her that way? Review the purpose of the fable, and then ask, what is the purpose of this myth? Now, do you think a myth like this could really be true? Well, obviously the children aren't going to think it's true. Could it really happen? No. Do you think the Indians who made up this myth thought it was true? Well, it's very likely they did. They believed in their Great Spirit. Now, I'm interspersing my own words there. The question is, do you think the Indians who made up this myth thought it was true? Now, then, they're told, change the Great Spirit so that instead of walking on earth with people, he's just invisible and just observes people on earth. So that they're changing the idea in the child's mind. He's just invisible now, and he observes people on earth. And we get over here then, and they tell the children, here it is in the child's book, and I'm going to read it to you word for word, telling your own myth. There are a lot of puzzling things in the world. The purpose of a myth is to explain something we can't explain otherwise. That's the purpose of a myth, they tell the children. Now, there are a lot of puzzling things in our world, and they name several. And the first one they name is, why do we have pain? Now, I'm not going to number two is, why do men have different skin colors? Why are men usually stronger than women? Why do so many animals like to eat meat? Why don't they eat fruits and vegetables? Myths are ways of answering questions like these. The answers may not be real, but they are fun. They are an interesting part of our imaginary world. One way to make up a myth is to think of a question like one of these. Suppose your question is, why do men have pain? Now imagine a time when men did not have pain. Pretend that the first men on earth went around without ever feeling pain. Next, imagine that some kind of God walked among men and something happened. Maybe a man did something bad or made a bad mistake. Because of this, the God punished men, giving them pain for the rest of their days. Now, if that doesn't sound to you like it's right out of the Genesis account, I don't know why. Because all you'd have to do is change men to Adam and Eve, and you'd have the Genesis account of why pain came into the world. It goes on to say, the objective of this lesson is to make children more aware of the nature of myths and to help children make up myths of their own. Then there's the myth about the God of work and how God put thorns on the roses to remind men of work. The children have to, there's just every one of these stories ends with having the children tell their own stories of the most personal nature.
Read the poem about the roses.
About what?
About the roses and this poem.
Oh, okay, it's not a poem, it's a role-playing activity for children. Let me see if I can find it again.
I read it without getting you or not.
Okay. Okay. The God of... All right, the purpose. Why roses have thorns. The characters. The God of work and a village of people. Action. The people of a village always work very hard. The God of work wishes to reward them and makes beautiful flowers grow around their fields. The flowers distract the people from their work. So the God makes thorns grow on the flowers as a reminder when they pick them and smell them that there is still work to be done. Now, there's something else in this one that I wanted to get. Well, I don't know where it is, but anyway, here it is. Now this, we're talking about third grade children. They have pictures here, and they're to look at these pictures and relate something to them, think of something. And the suggested topics for conversation are social issues, for example, why we have problems like these in the cities, or a personal experience prompted by the picture event. And the teachers constantly, manual says, that, if the children can't think of a personal experience that relates to these stories, help them by asking them questions. Did you ever disobey your parents? Were you ever punished unjustly by your parents? So these are some of the questions that are suggested. How did you feel when that happened? The teacher is to prod the child and bring these things out of him. Even if he doesn't discuss them freely, she is to bring them out. This now, we're to the 4th grade book. I haven't read the 5th and 6th grade book yet, but we're building up an idea as we go along here. Here is a story about this story is about a bunch of kids making some people miserable who moved into a community. And the boy's mean grandmother, I know, it's getting awfully late. The boy's mean grandmother comes down on him very hard because he's mistreated these people, but she comes out the villain because she's mean to this boy. They do things like jam up traffic in the street. Now, suggesting this to 4th grade kids, how they tie up all these cars with ropes and wires and make the biggest traffic jam, and that was the biggest game, the most fun. And of course, the police were all upset about it. This book, I'll just tell you about this one quickly. This one goes on with more myths about God. Then the children are told, pretend you are a God. What would you do to make the world a better place? Pretend you are not a God, pardon me. Pretend you are God, capital God. Think of a son or daughter of your God. Then where does evil come from? Why are some people bad? You could have a war of some kind, or some kind of a wrestling match between your son of God or your daughter of God, let's see, a war between your son of God or your daughter of God and evil. How does the encounter change the lives of people? They have over here prayer in public school today. It's here, right here in this book, Prayer of the Monkey. Dear God, why have you made me so ugly with this ridiculous face? Grimaces seem asked for. Shall I always be the clown of your creation? Oh, who will lift this melancholy form from my heart? Could you not one day let someone take me seriously, Lord? The next one then is a poem of a mouse. I am so little and gray, dear God. And it goes on and on about how ugly I am and why did you make me like this? And then they are told, make up your own poem, or make up your own prayer that some animal might pray. But this one, they have them role-playing that they are God, capital G-O-D. And, role-play the Son of God. Perhaps you are the Son of God. What would you do? Anyway, the 5th and 6th book then just builds on this idea. And that's all the time I'm going to take. If y'all want to ask any questions, come and look at the books, you're welcome to. I've taken about an hour and a half. This is D.C. Heath. I want you to remember, too, that this company put out this series and this. They go together. This is the secondary series. This is the elementary series. And there's a thing, an idea from beginning to end. Yes?
I couldn't hear the name of it.
D.C. Heath is the publishing company. H-E-A-T-H, yes. This one is called Communicating. The elementary series, Communicating. There is, this is on one called Communicating. This particular series. On the secondary level, it's called Dynamics of Language.
On the committee teachers, am I right, who supposedly
Yes.
books?
Mm-hmm.
Who were they parents or? Well, I know you think or you hope that they didn't read them.
Right, I do.
All right, but assuming they did, are they parents? I mean,
I don't know. I'm sure some of them are.
are they men and women?
Yes, mostly women.
And how many?
Now this is a rough guess, but there were 8 on the first. There were 2 different committees. About 8 on the first secondary committee, 8 on the elementary committee, and then 5 on the final adoption committee. Now I did hear one person say, secondhand report of one person who served on the elementary committee. I heard her make the remark that we work ourselves to death, and then they go out and pick out what they want to anyway. So apparently this one person anyway, did not feel that they didn't select the books that she wanted them to select. Mm-hmm. So maybe the committee of 5 had the final decision in selecting the books. Yes.
Is there any way that you can get the names of the people who were on this committee?
I don't know if you might could get the information from the board. I'm not sure. No, I don't know of any purpose it would serve. Really, I would agree. Well, that's my purpose. I mean, I know who they are, but I wouldn't want to give out names. Yes.
One question. Are those books being used in a lot of schools?
They'll be used in every one of our schools.
I mean in other schools in other states.
I'm sure they are in some states.
Are they in use?
They are in use, yes. I'm sure that. In fact, these were considered in Texas, and some people I've been in contact with in Texas had done a review on these books and had forced some changes in the books For instance, there was a paragraph of illustrating a topic sentence or something in the 5th grade book about the pioneers, and it said, who were the pioneers? People who are happy and successful in life don't pick up and leave and go off into the wilderness and strike out on their own.
I read that in these.
No, you didn't read it in these. You read on a paper, because I stuck the paper in there, and it was taken from the book. That's where you read it. But it had been there. But anyway, the pioneers were the failures of life, the men who couldn't control their bodily appetites, the thieves, the women chasers, the drunkards, the sick, the people who couldn't make it any other way. Well, they struck off and settled the West. Yes.
What could be done to prevent these from being in office?
I would suggest, as much as it bothers them, that the board ought to be called. They ought to hear from people all over this county. You should talk to other people and let them know what's in these books. I have every intention of talking to police departments. I hope I can talk with the police departments, because I want to emphasize the rebellion against authority, the lack of respect for authority that is hinted on in these books just constantly. And talk to influential people. All right. A gentleman, Mr. McCoy, does that have the name Darrell on it? Let me see it. Could you please? Someone brought these tonight. Mr. McCoy called me and asked me about the possibility of petitions, and I suggested he go ahead and draw